You just had a thought. You didn't choose it, it arrived. So here's the question I want you to sit with. Who sent it? We treat our thoughts like they're the most personal thing about us. Your body can be seen, your words can be heard, but your thoughts, those feel like yours, the last private territory, the one place nobody else gets in. Except here's the problem. You didn't choose your first thought this morning. You didn't schedule the memory that just surfaced. You don't decide what pops into your head, it happens to you. Thoughts arrive like weather. And when you actually follow that observation into the physics, into the neuroscience, into the mathematics of what's happening inside your skull, the word mind starts to come apart. Not metaphorically, mechanically. So let's look at the mechanism. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. A thought is not a ghost. It's not a spark of something non-physical floating through your mind. It's electrochemical. You have roughly 86 billion neurons in your brain, connected by something like 100 trillion synaptic links. When you think, millions of those neurons fire in cascading patterns, electrical signals jumping across gaps, chemicals releasing, regions of the brain activating in concert. The prefrontal cortex handles planning. The hippocampus pulls memory. The amygdala wraps it in emotion. A single thought is a symphony across an enormously complex biological machine. We gave it a name, thought. But naming it doesn't mean we understand it. The word is not the thing. Here's what we do know. Every thought you've ever had was preceded by a neural event you weren't aware of. The conscious experience, the moment you notice yourself thinking, comes after the brain has already started the process. You didn't initiate the thought. You witnessed it beginning. Benjamin Libet tested this in the 1980s. He asked people to flick their wrist whenever they felt like it and to note the exact moment they decided to move. Simple experiment. Devastating result. The brain's electrical activity, what's called the readiness potential, began building 550 milliseconds before the movement. But participants only became consciously aware of deciding to move about 200 milliseconds before. The brain was already moving before the decision showed up in awareness. The decision was the last thing to happen. Read that again slowly. The brain moved first. The I decided came after, which means what you experience as deciding, that felt sense of being the author of your actions, is arriving late to a party that already started without you. Now go one level deeper. Before you had a single conscious thought, before you could speak, before you had words for anything, your brain was already being built. Genetics handed you a specific neural architecture. Your mother's stress hormones during pregnancy shaped your developing nervous system. The sounds that reached you in the womb, the quality of early attachment, the specific emotional tone of the people around you in your first years, all of it was installing itself before you had any say. And then language came, from outside. The categories you used to think, fair, dangerous, beautiful, worthless, normal, strange, those were handed to you by a culture, a family, a language that existed centuries before you were born. You didn't invent those categories, you inherited them. And since you think in language, since your inner monologue runs almost entirely in words, a huge portion of your thinking runs on borrowed infrastructure. The language you think in isn't yours. It was here before you. Go further. Your emotional reactions. What triggers fear? What signals safety? What makes you angry without knowing why? Those are shaped by evolutionary pressures that are millions of years old. The threat detection system in your amygdala wasn't calibrated for your life. It was calibrated for ancestral environments that haven't existed for tens of thousands of years. You're running ancient software. It fires on modern inputs, and when it fires, it feels like your reaction, your feeling, your instinct. It isn't. It's a biological inheritance from minds that came long before you, solving problems you'll never face in a world that no longer exists. The self that feels like it's thinking assembled itself from the outside in. Parents, culture, evolution, random neurological variation. There was no you supervising the construction. Now here's where it gets really strange. Because even the thoughts you're consciously aware of, even the ones that feel most deliberate, most intentional, those represent a tiny fraction of what's actually happening. Neuroscientists estimate that conscious processing handles about 40 to 50 bits of information per second. The unconscious, somewhere between 11 million and 40 million bits per second, every second, constantly, without telling you. Every word you've ever spoken was assembled below consciousness before it reached your mouth. Every preference you think you hold was shaped by unconscious processes that frame the options before you were ever consulted. You think you're choosing. You're receiving the output of a process that already ran. John Bargh at Yale spent decades studying this. People primed with concepts of warmth Literally holding a warm cup of coffee judged strangers as having warmer personalities. People in cold rooms were harsher in moral judgments. The thought felt like theirs. The temperature made it. And nobody knew. Nobody caught it happening. The unconscious shaped the output, and the conscious mind signed its name to it. Daniel Kahneman spent a career mapping this. He called it System 1 and System 2, the fast, automatic, unconscious system that runs most of your mental life, making snap judgments, pattern matching, filling in gaps, driving behavior, and the slow, deliberate, conscious system that believes it's in charge. Mostly, System 2 is a narrator. It tells the story of decisions that System 1 already made. It's very confident. It's usually late. Consciousness is less like a driver and more like a passenger who occasionally grabs the wheel and genuinely believes they've been steering the whole time. Now let me bring the physics in directly, because this is where the question stops being just psychological and becomes something much larger. If the universe is deterministic, if every physical state is the necessary consequence of the prior physical state, then the neural firing pattern that produced your last thought was determined by the state of your brain 1 second before, which was determined by the second before that, which traces back causally through your life, through your childhood, through your parents, through evolution, through the formation of Earth, through the death of a star, all the way back to the initial conditions of the universe. Your thoughts on this view are not generated by you. They're generated by a causal chain 13.8 billion years long that happens to pass through you. Now, quantum mechanics. People always reach for quantum mechanics here, hoping it opens a door. And I want to be honest about this, because I've seen this move made badly a lot of times. At the quantum level, physical events are genuinely probabilistic, not just unknown, actually undetermined until measured. Some physicists and philosophers hope this creates space for free will, for genuine authorship. But random isn't the same as chosen. A thought generated by quantum randomness in your neurons isn't more yours than a determined thought. It's just unpredictable. Unpredictable and autonomous are completely different things. You can't take credit for a roll of dice, even if the dice were inside your head. So we have two options at the physics level. Determined thoughts, the product of causal chains you didn't start, or random thoughts, the product of quantum probability you didn't choose. Neither one gives you authorship. Neither one makes the thought yours in any deep sense. And now the question becomes, who is this you that's trying to claim ownership in the first place? Because even if we granted that thoughts could be owned, we'd need a stable, coherent self to own them. And when neuroscience went looking for that self, it ran into a problem. It couldn't find one. Not a command center, not a place in the brain where the you lives and makes decisions. What they found instead was massively parallel distributed processing. Different regions contributing simultaneously, no single area in charge, no moment that's clearly the decision point. The self isn't a location, it's a pattern that the brain's activity produces. Split brain research made this undeniable. Sever the corpus callosum, the thick bundle of fibers connecting the brain's two hemispheres, and you get two independent streams of experience. Two separate systems, each unaware of the other, each believing it's the whole self. Two yous in one skull, each convinced of its unity. The unified self isn't a foundation, it's a performance. A story the brain tells about itself to help coordinate its own activity. And here's the detail that I find most striking. Michael Gazzaniga's research showed that the left hemisphere, the language-dominant one, the narrator, will confabulate. Freely, fluently, and convincingly make up explanations for behaviors it didn't control and doesn't understand. Show someone something with their right visual field only. Ask them why they reached for it, and they'll give you a reason. A confident, detailed reason. A completely fabricated reason. The narrator didn't know. The narrator invented. The self that says, "These are my thoughts," is itself a thought, generated by the same machinery, evaluated by no independent observer. You are watching a movie and calling yourself the projectionist. But the projector is running on its own. So what are your thoughts if they're not yours? They're events, the same way a storm is an event, not owned by the atmosphere, not chosen by the wind. Just what happens when specific conditions interact in specific ways. Your thought is what happens when billions of years of physical history, filtered through billions of years of evolution, filtered through your particular genetics and neurology, and the firing pattern of your neurons at this exact moment, produces an electrochemical cascade that reaches awareness. That doesn't make it less real. Rain is real, it's just not chosen. And here's where something opens up. something I think is actually more interesting than the original assumption. If your thoughts are events in a larger system, then thinking isn't something you do inside your head. It's something the universe does through you. You're not the author. You're the location where authorship happens. The place where 13.8 billion years of physical causation becomes briefly, mysteriously aware of itself. That's not mysticism. That's just physics followed honestly to where it leads. Now, does this mean nothing matters? Does responsibility dissolve? Does the self evaporate and we're all just meat puppets watching the show? No, and here's why. The process that generates your thoughts isn't separate from you. It is you, not a self watching from behind a curtain, the process itself. You're not the owner of the fire, you're the burning. Responsibility doesn't require a ghost in the machine. It requires a system that responds to reasons, that changes based on consequences, that can be influenced by information. You are that system. When someone is held responsible, in a court, in a relationship, in your own conscience, what's being engaged is exactly that. A responsive, continuous process that can update, that has memory, that acts into the future based on what it learns now. That's real. That works. It doesn't need a metaphysical self standing behind it. But here's what actually shifts, and this is what I want to leave you with. When you stop treating your thoughts as personal possessions, when you see them clearly as events, arriving, passing through, something changes. The anxious thought that showed up this morning, you didn't generate it. You don't have to believe it. You don't have to identify with it completely. You can watch it the way you watch weather. It came from somewhere. It'll go somewhere. It isn't necessarily the truth about anything. The thought that says you're not good enough, it assembled itself from old inputs, old fears, voices that maybe haven't been in your life for years. It isn't reporting reality. It's a pattern the machine produces under certain conditions, the same way your knee jerks when a doctor taps it. Automatic, not chosen, not final. Feynman's real move, the one that ran through everything he did, was to stay curious about the machinery without being threatened by what the machinery revealed. When physics showed that particles don't have definite positions until observed, he didn't panic about reality. He got more interested. When the math showed that light takes every possible path simultaneously, he followed the math. The self is less than we thought. The process is more interesting than we imagined. Both of those things can be true at the same time. You've been walking around thinking your thoughts are yours. They're not. They're the universe thinking through you. And the universe, it turns out, is a much more interesting thinker than you gave it credit for. That thought you had when this started, the one that arrived without being called, it was 13.8 billion years in the making. It passed through the death of stars, the formation of a planet, billions of years of evolution, the specific lives of every ancestor you have, and the precise electrochemical state of your brain in this moment. And it felt like it just occurred to you. That's not a small thing. That's the most remarkable thing about thinking. Not that you do it, that it happens at all, and that somewhere in the process, something lights up and notices. You're not the author. You're where the story becomes aware of itself. That's enough. That's more than enough.